Originally named the Salt Lake City and built in 1907 by the Chicago Shipbuilding Company for the Holmes Steamship Company, today's vessel would be used for the iron ore and grain trade across the Great Lakes. On February 2, 1912, the Salt Lake City would be sold to the Tomlinson fleet, and it would be here that she would receive her final name, the Chester A. Congdon. The Congdon had a length of 532 feet. She had a width of 56 and a depth of 26. She also had a gross registered tonnage of 6,530 tons. Like many ships for her time, the Congdon would be pushed along by a triple expansion steam engine across the waters. When the Congdon became part of the Tomlinson fleet, she also became part of the Continental Steamship Company. And when she received her second and final name, she was renamed after Chester Adgate Congdon. And throughout her career on the Great Lakes, she would actually be involved in several accidents throughout them. On November 6, 1918, the Congdon, with a cargo of 390,154 bushels of wheat, would depart from Fort William, Ontario at around 2:28 a.m. As she was making her way outside of Thunder Cape, the Congdon would actually come into contact with a southwest gale and heavy seas against her. She would try to make her way, however, she would turn at 4 a.m. and head back about 7 or 8 miles, and then anchor. As the wind and waves began to subside, the decision was made by the captain, Captain Charles J. Utterson, to resume the journey at 10:15 a.m. As the Congdon began to make her way outside of Thunder Cape again, she actually would still encounter some wind and waves. And then again, the weather would shut them in with a heavy fog. When the Congdon was passing Thunder Cape at 10:40 a.m., a course was set for Passage Island, and the Congdon was set to 9 miles per hour. And her captain's intentions were that if it continued to be foggy and the seas were rough, then they would run for about 2.5 hours and then stop. The Congdon's officers did not, however, hear the Passage Island fog signal as they approached, and at around 1 p.m., the ship would fetch up on the southerly reef of Canoe Island. The captain said after the accident, and I quote, "We were running under slow speed at about 9 miles an hour, and I figured on stopping on account of the fog until we could locate something. Then, at 8 minutes after 1 in the afternoon, she fetched up, grounded." End quote. Captain Charles would then dispatch his second mate, Schwab, to Port Arthur, and this would be aboard a fishing vessel from Isle Royale. However, engine problems would actually occur on this fishing vessel, and it would take them several hours to even make the distance. However, once news reached from second mate Schwab, local wreckers were then dispatched to respond. A tugboat and a wrecking barge named Empire were sent to the scene, and they would begin salvaging about 30,000 bushels of wheat from the Congdon. This was from the forward end of the ship. As the salvagers were working, on November 8th, a 55-mile-an-hour wind would literally blow them off of the wreck. When they returned on the 10th after the winds had died down, the Congdon's back was actually broken, and this was just below the number 6 hatch. From there, another 50,000 bushels of wheat would be salvaged from the Congdon, and this was right before the vessel would be declared a total loss. James Playfair of Midland, Ontario would go on to purchase the Congdon, and this would be from the underwriters, and in hopes to make a triumphant salvage attempt on the 11-year-old vessel. However, when the salvagers made their way to the wreck of the Congdon, they discovered that she was broken in 2 sections and lying on either side of the reef in around 100 feet of water. And then the decision was made to not salvage the Congdon. After the whole ordeal of the Congdon being thrown up on a reef from the storm, no lives were lost, however, in all of this chaos. And from then on until today, the Congdon has been an underwater archaeological site, which is under the protection of the National Park Service of Isle Royale. The Congdon has been a recreational scuba diving site, and she is commonly visited by other scuba divers. The A.L. Hopkins was built in 1880 in Marine City, Michigan, as a small wooden package freighter. The Hopkins had a length of 170 feet. She had a beam of 32 and a depth of 12. She also had a gross registered tonnage of 756 tons, and she could carry a net tonnage of 640. The Hopkins would have numerous owners, and she would be involved in several accidents, including being sunk in Lake Erie in September 20th of 1884. She would also run aground in 1894 in Thunder Bay on Island Reef, Michigan in Lake Huron. After running aground in Thunder Bay, the Hopkins would actually be rebuilt in Toledo, Ohio, and she would receive 2 masts. She again would have a different owner change. The Hopkins would receive her final ownership on March 20th, 1907, and she would be owned by Lawrence Brown. This little wooden freighter would have quite the career on the Great Lakes. However, that would all change for her on October 2nd, 1911. On October 2nd, 1911, at around 11 p.m. at night, the A.L. Hopkins would depart from Bayfield, Wisconsin. She would have aboard her a cargo of lumber, and making her way out into Lake Superior, she was in for a rough ride. As the Hopkins was out on Lake Superior, a fierce storm would catch her off guard, and these wind and waves that would smash against her would nearly capsize the small wooden freighter. This storm would leave her waterlogged, and after losing a part of her deck load, a crew member was also washed overboard in the horrific incident. The rest of the crew members on the Hopkins attempted to abandon the vessel. However, as they were trying to make their way onto the lifeboat, it would be washed away by the storm, and there would only be a single crew member aboard it. After all of these intense moments during the storm on the Hopkins, nobody lost their lives, including the crew member who was washed overboard, and the rest of the crew were finally able to make it onto the lifeboat. As the crew were safely aboard the lifeboat, which had made its way back to it, they were finally rescued by the ore carrier, Dinky, and this was on October 3rd, 1911. The Hopkins, however, was beginning to sink, and she was about 15 miles northeast of Michigan Island in the Apostle Islands. When she was discovered, she was partially submerged. However, the Hopkins did not again sink immediately, and she would be blown all throughout Lake Superior for about 2 weeks with the wind and waves at her mercy. Finally, she would be sighted by the steamer William F. Corey on October 17, 1911, and this would be about 50 miles east of Michigan Island. Sometime after this, however, the Hopkins would sink, and she would be discovered east of Michigan Island at the bottom of Lake Superior. Thankfully, throughout this whole intense ordeal, no lives again were lost, and this was considered a very close call for the crew of the A.L. Hopkins. Our last close call shipwreck story on today's episode would be that of the Altadoc, or as she was originally named in 1901 as the Lakeshore. The Altadoc was built in West Bay City, Michigan as a steel bulk freighter. She would have a length of 356 feet, a beam of 50, and a depth of 28. She also had a gross tonnage of 3,871 tons, and she could carry a net tonnage of 2,997 tons. In 1903, she was owned by the Gilchrist Transportation Company of Cleveland, Ohio. In 1904, she would run aground in Racine, Wisconsin, in Lake Michigan while she was carrying a cargo of coal. In 1905, on November 6, the Altadoc was involved in a collision with a schooner as well. Finally, in 1926, she would be owned by the Patterson Steamship Company of Fort William, Ontario, and it was here that she received her name change from Lakeshore to Altadoc. Aside from a few small incidents, the Altadoc would have a good career. However, this would change on December 8th, 1927, on Lake Superior. And if you are all familiar with that date and that time on that lake, you would know that this would be one of the vessels that would also go down, as the SS Kamloops would as well. On December 8th, 1927, the Altadoc would be out on Lake Superior battling the same storm of over 70 miles an hour that would sink the SS Kamloops. Not only was the Altadoc lost on Lake Superior, but the Agawa, Lambton, and Martin would also be lost on Lake Superior. The Altadoc was making her way out on Lake Superior empty with no cargo aboard her. She was making her way for Fort William, Ontario, when the storm would finally smash her aground at Copper Harbor on Keweenaw Point. This was at the northern tip of Michigan. The Altadoc was hard aground, however, she was still intact during this storm. So, the crew members aboard her were actually able to make it safely ashore without any lives being lost. After this harrowing incident, and before salvagers could get to her, the 26-year-old vessel would crack and the ship would be swept by a fire in its coal bunker. However, the Altadoc's pilot house was actually removed and then used for many years as a gift shop and a 2-room hotel at Copper Harbor. Turning the pilot house into a gift shop/resort would be incredible to see. She was also featured in a National Geographic magazine as possibly the world's smallest resort as well. However, the pilot house would also have additional cabins built onto her and the property as well. A mystery, though, surrounds what happened to the pilot house. Apparently, in the 1880s, a mysterious fire destroyed the pilot house, and it is no longer there. And that is 3 full close call vessel stories that have occurred on the Great Lakes. I thank you everyone for joining me in today's episode. Well, with that being said, there's 3 stories for you guys that that were close calls. No lives were lost, especially the A.L. Hopkins. I can't believe nobody lost their lives on that vessel when she just about flipped over. And then the other crew member, all I could find was that single crew member got washed off. I'm assuming that he got picked back up again on the A.L. Hopkins. And then the single crew member that was on the lifeboat must have been able to row the lifeboat back to the A.L. Hopkins, pick up the rest of the crew, and then they abandoned her, is what I have to guesstimate what happened. I couldn't find exact moment-by-moment details. Perhaps you guys can in your research. But from what I found, I believe that's what happened to her. And then she eventually sank after drifting out on Lake Superior like that. And the Congdon, yeah, I've seen a lot of just interesting facts on the Congdon, but dang, that vessel breaking apart like that, and then being grounded like that, that's crazy that no lives were lost on it. But you can definitely dive her wreck and see what she looks like. And then oh yeah, and then the Altadoc, that was incredible because I could not find the names of those other ships that had sunk with the SS Kamloops on that 1927 storm out on Lake Superior. And lo and behold, when I do my research on the Altadoc, I find the names of the other ships that went down. It's funny they didn't mention the SS Kamloops, but maybe that's because that was the 6th or the 7th that had gone down, and those other ones occurred later, like the 8th, maybe the 9th. Either way, that's Lake Superior, 1927. That is the storm that would sink the Kamloops and these other ships. But thank goodness no lives were lost on the Altadoc. And then it's too bad her pilot house was destroyed by fire. That would be amazing to see still today. But yeah, it's not there anymore. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. If you guys, as always, have any other additional information or maybe a clearer picture as to the series of events that happened to these vessels, definitely let me know in the comment section down below. Also, if you guys are ever interested, there's still merch. We still have merch on the website, and the link, I always post the link to the merchandise website in the description. If you guys want to check that out, amazing. But yeah, tell me what you guys think, and I'm really excited for this new year for the channel, and we're only just getting started, and there's much more to come, much more amazing interviews, and we will definitely be going in person again to some museum ships. So keep your guys' eyes and expectations hopefully not too high. I hope I can deliver on them, but yeah, keep them excited at least. So, but with that being said, as always, God bless you guys and have an amazing time, whether it's night, day, morning, noon, or night, whichever. But yeah, see you guys all next time on the next episode of Songs of the Great Lakes.